I accept this award on behalf of Ethiopians and Eritreans, especially those who made the ultimate sacrifice in the cause of peace.
This is Abiy Ahmed. He is currently the Ethiopian Prime Minister after being elected in 2018.
The Council voted him earlier last week to replace Haile Mariam Desalegn.
Today, headlines around the world accuse him of war crimes and using food as a weapon of war. In Tigray, they're now facing the world's worst hunger crisis in a decade. The big question remains, why is Ethiopia in this dire situation? Ethiopia is bounded by Eritrea to the north, Djibouti to the northeast, Somalia to the east, Kenya to the south, and South Sudan and Sudan to the west. Ethiopia is a very diverse country with lots of different ethnic groups. This is because, for centuries, Ethiopia was an empire up until the 1970s. This empire was built on conquered nations, and many of the ethnic groups within the empire were treated as second or third class citizens. In 1977, the empire was replaced by a communist dictatorship led by Colonel Mengistu. This was a brutal government and had the Red Terror killing a lot of political opponents. Civil war roared, and two of the strongest militias were the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the Eritrean People's Liberation Front. After the support ended, or its support for Mengistu's regime, Eritrea declared independence, leaving the TPLF as the most powerful force in Ethiopia. The TPLF formed a coalition with other political parties known as the EPRDF, Ethiopians People Revolutionary Democratic Front. They ruled for almost 30 years. During this time, Ethiopia was developing its economy without civil war, but there was issues blooming. The coalition made Ethiopia a one-party state, and because Tigrayans dominated that coalition, they ran the country. While they were in power, the TPLF ruled with a very oppressive nature. Political activists were being thrown into prison, journalism was highly restricted, and elections were accused of being rigged. In 1998, the war with Eritrea started, which continued for decades. Frustration started to boil over, with protests happening from 2015 to 2017, forcing the Prime Minister to resign. And this brings us to Abiy Ahmed. Abiy would speak of peace and seemed like a safe choice to the TPLF. Abiy started to remove corrupt political people from power and gave journalists more freedom. He also started to create a new coalition called the Prosperity Party. TPLF were invited to join but declined and joined the opposition. Perhaps one of the most famous actions Abiy did was end the war between Ethiopia and Eritrea. The war that had killed thousands and had been going on for decades. This brings us back to where we started, Abiy winning the Nobel Peace Prize. Inside the country, conflict between ethnic groups were flaring up. Abiy went back to political opponents being locked up, and journalists were being limited once again. And then came COVID. Like many other countries, Abiy delayed the elections, but many accused him of delaying it for political motivation. The Tigrayans went ahead and held their own elections the following month. Ethiopia then mobilized its military. Abiy issued a statement on November the 4th saying Tigray attacked one of their military bases. Abiy insisted it would be a quick operation and would be completely bloodless. These statements were both false. In the first few months, internet access was shut off. There was no cell phone access and communication was highly limited. No one really understood what was happening. Finally, reports started to come out of conflict that it had killed civilians and caused the widespread hunger across Tigray. And this is why I'm speaking with Ian Johnson, the Programme Manager at Food for the Hungry. They have been working firsthand within Ethiopia to combat the acute malnutrition.
So I'm Ian Johnson and I'm Programme Manager for Food for the Hungry UK. Food for the Hungry is a Christian international development organisation that's been serving the poor globally for about 50 years, for exactly 50 years actually. And we work in partnership with local communities to help them get out of poverty. So we're very community based and we go to the poorest of the poor. We work with the community leaders and the poorest to work out what is needed to get out of poverty in 10 to 12 years. And then we walk with that community over the period in education, in livelihoods, in health, and in helping communities be resilient as well. So that's our sort of style. We graduate the community, progress, and become more sustainable. And then we also do relief work at the side. Our main activity is development work, but where there are natural disasters in the countries and the communities that we work, we respond there with relief to alleviate the suffering, really, and to save lives. The name of the organisation comes from Psalm 146, "Blessed is the Lord who executes justice for the oppressed, who gives food for the hungry." And we're seeking to walk with Jesus in doing that. Most of our staff are actually local. So in Ethiopia, which we're going to talk about today, we have 1,500 staff. So it's our biggest country. So it's typically the case, it might be that staff grew up in the communities and the regions where they're now employed. They were those that were educated and sort of escaped poverty. But now they've felt called by God really to go back and serve in those communities and help others. So that's really the DNA of the organisation.
And Ian, you mentioned there about Ethiopia. Now that's a country that has been in the headlines for the past 2 years so far. It's also been described that it's got the world's worst food crisis at the moment in a decade. Could you explain to me the events that have happened here, what's led up to it and what we're seeing now over there?
Well, there's two big things really that have happened. I mean, Ethiopia was already a very poor country in 25 million below poverty line. But two things have happened in the last few years. First of all, there's been a long-term drought, the worst drought in recent history. And because 85% of the population are involved in agriculture, typically in subsistence agriculture with very small farms, drought and rainfall has a massive impact. So that's been one factor. But then in the last year, there's been civil war in the north of the country between the regional government in Tigray and the national government. And the fighting has had a devastating effect in Tigray, and there are loads of refugees who've had to flee their homes, and more than 90% of the population in Tigray, so that's more than 5 million people, are in need of food aid. And it's always the poorest that suffer the most, and the malnutrition among young children is increasing by 2% a week.
Could you explain to me what the impacts of acute malnutrition are?
It's particularly severe with young children. Lack of food and an inadequately diverse diet has a really big impact on children under 5, and causes stunting. And stunting isn't just lower height, but it affects the brain and brain development. And children with severe malnutrition can never really catch up from that. So it's a particularly severe situation there. It also means the children, or adults for that matter, are far more prone to catch malaria and diarrhea and die from that. So, the knock-on impacts are very, very severe too. And that's the sort of situation we're really wrestling with in northern Tigray now. Just last week, to give you an idea, one of our staff members was delivering 7 children just in a midwife, met a midwife, and the midwife had delivered 7 children in an open field just to the mums there. And then it was just a case of how do you support those mothers and babies in that situation. So our staff who live and work there are doing all that they can to address that, while also looking after their own families, which is, another challenge.
And something we've heard about recently in the news is the fact that, they've really struggled to get aid received in Ethiopia. Could you give us an idea? Have you experienced any problems with that, or have you encountered anything to do with the difficulty in getting aid over there?
Well, the issue really is very local. It's not aid into Ethiopia, but it's our staff with ways to help getting access to the local communities, because maybe there are military roadblocks, or there's fighting in the communities, and some of the community members have sort of just hunkered down there. So it's actually getting to those communities and the people most in need. That's been the big problem, and that's even with an organisation like us, which has got all these people on the ground who are local as well. So that's been the main difficulty.
And could you tell us then what the challenges Food for the Hungry are actually facing?
In our humanitarian work, so in this relief to the refugees and to the communities in the middle of Tigray where there's fighting, access, and can we get our staff there to start providing safe water and providing relief and food and getting medicines to the vulnerable populations. But even, in a broader context, we've been working in development in that region, and have been very successful. And there are big challenges there. Literacy is only at 50%, so education is vital. Health, 40% of children are stunted, so health and nutrition is vital. 25 million are living in poverty even before what's happened here. So long-term livelihoods work is really important. So, we'd ask the viewers to pray for peace so that we can get back to that work and help these communities be able to provide for themselves long term. That's really what we want to do. I mean, I was just reading a story the other day about a guy in northern Ethiopia called Amro, and his wife and family, who were dependent, the smallholder farm, and they were dependent on food aid all the time. And he was wondering about emigrating to Saudi Arabia to get work, to be able to send money back for his family and things like that. But he's working in a community that Food for the Hungry is supporting, and He joined a savings group there where people were encouraged just to save a tiny bit of money. He borrowed some money from that savings group, bought some seeds, and Food for the Hungry is working in an agricultural value chain there, at all aspects of the chain. He got training in climate smart techniques that are effective where there's drought. And he had, at the end of that year, fantastic harvest, able to pay back the loan. We set up a group of farmers to, in aggregate, negotiate better prices for their harvests. And in the second year, even better, sort of getting 15 times the harvest that he'd been getting a few years before. And from that, he was able to set up a beekeeping business and get honey for his family. And then the year after that, even more successful, and able to start, even built a new accommodation for his family. So that's the sort of thing we want to get back to, really. So I'd really encourage, viewers to pray for peace and for the Food for the Hungry staff who are trying to do this sort of really effective, successful work. That guy is now a lead farmer, a model farmer who trains others in that sort of thing. And what's happening in Tigray now is putting all this work at risk, really. So, we want to do the relief, but we want to get back to that development as well.
Amen. And I just wanted to point out there, you mentioned about the farmers. Well, a recent article on your website explains we don't ship sheep, but we do support local economies. Could you explain how the logistical side of supporting places in need works?
So the article that you're referring to, I know what that is. That's referring to the gift catalogue, where people in the UK or the US or wherever can send a virtual gift to a family member for Christmas or something like that. And the gift is actually a sheep or a cow for somebody in somewhere like Ethiopia. And what we certainly don't ship sheep or cows from the UK or the US. They've got plenty of sheep and cows in Ethiopia, thank you very much. But what happens is we'll support the local economy there, and say it's a cow. The cow is bought, and typically it might be bought by a savings group, so a group of women together who would get this cow to almost start a virtuous cycle of development. And they would look after the cow. The savings group would pay the vet's bills if there are any. Milk would be used for the children in the family. The manure would be used in the fields. And if the cow has a calf, that would be given to the next savings group member, so that animal starts a virtuous cycle, really, and makes a sort of long-term sustainable difference to that savings group and those really poor women. So that's what that was referring to, and it's just talking about really starting that virtuous cycle where we make a sustainable difference in the communities.
And also, could you tell our viewers and myself how you incorporate Jesus and the good word of Jesus into your work?
We work closely with churches, local leaders and families to help communities thrive. I mean, that's one of our little staple sentences, really, to do that. So we're following Psalm 146 and Jesus' call, bring good news to the poor, addressing spiritual poverty, but physical poverty too. So our staff addressing spiritual and physical poverty as very much a part of their DNA. They would start every day with prayer and praise and Bible study relevant to their work, and they're seeking to serve Jesus and show compassion on those around them. And then in the communities that we work, we'll work very closely with the churches there, hand in hand, addressing spiritual and physical poverty.
I mean, many people may be at home and thinking, gosh, we've been talking about Ethiopia, you know, I'm really far away, I'm in the UK, you know, I'm too far away to help. What would you say to those people? How can they actually help the situation, and how can they help people in poverty?
The first thing I would say is, please pray for Ethiopia. Pray for the communities there. Pray for the Food for the Hungry staff, your Christian brothers and sisters on the front line, really, addressing some devastating poverty. And pray for them. And other things that you can do, if I would encourage you to support the poor in your local area as well through your church. Maybe your church could support Food for the Hungry and local communities. Maybe personally, we'd be delighted to receive anything you felt prompted to give. Look on our website for the UK, it's uk-fh.org, and you can either donate to the relief work that's happening in Tigray or to long-term development work as well. So support in all those ways, please do. Our local Ethiopian team and the country director has been sending us prayer requests as we've been lifting that team up in prayer regularly. I would say pray that God would remove the roadblocks and that prevent food and relief supplies and medicine getting to those in the most need. Also, I mean, all the FH staff that are in Ethiopia, they're in the middle of this crisis. Their families are in danger as well, and they're seeking to serve still in the midst of their own mini crises. So please lift them up before God for you, your Christian brothers and sisters. Pray for peace. Pray for an end to this drought that's having long-term knock-on effects, and seek to support them in whatever ways you can.
And lastly, I would like to ask you, if people want to keep up to date with Food for the Hungry and what projects you guys are working on and the progress as well of the projects you're working on, where can they find you online? Could you please point them in the right direction?
Yes, okay. So if you're in the UK, please look at uk-fh.org. If you're in another country, I would suggest you look at fh.org. And we, in the global north, where we've got officers in a number of countries where we support our field staff in places like Ethiopia. You can also look for social media at food4, as in the number 4, the Hungry, all in one line. You can look there. For the UK, send an email, call the number on the website. We'd be delighted to talk to you. And